So it's past now, so I think we can kick off the proceedings. I just wanted to say welcome to everybody. Thank you so much for joining us, and I think there will be some more people joining us as the evening goes on. Before I introduce the evening, I thought I would just give some introductory remarks. So as with so many religious communities, the pandemic has significantly disrupted the way that we British Muslims can practice our faith with the holy month of Ramadan upon us. It really is great to be able to connect with all of you tonight virtually as we continue to work together to battle against COVID-19, which has really disrupted our lives over the last year or so in so many different ways. So this evening is more than anything, it's a celebration of all the amazing examples of community action during the pandemic. And it's a space for us to hear from frontline workers who've dedicated their lives for the last year or so and sacrificed, and really for us to pay our gratitude to them. We have an amazing and diverse panel joining us this evening with esteemed guests, and I thank all of them for taking the time to join us this evening. Thank you so much for taking the time out. Our speakers will be talking on a range of topics. But before we get started, I'd like to just take a few moments to introduce myself and the Anti-Muslim Hatred Working Group. So thank you to all of you for being here on behalf of the independent members of the Anti-Muslim Hatred Working Group. My name is Akila Ahmed, and I chair the independent members of the Cross-Government Working Group on Anti-Muslim Hatred. I'm also a governing body member of the NHS CCG in Brighton and Hove. Now, the working group was set up in 2012 by government to assist in tackling hate and prejudice against all British Muslims. Since the group's inception almost a decade ago, the work that we do has shifted in order to meet the needs of the current time, but also our goals and values have remained the same: to promote a positive understanding of British Muslim communities, to be impactful at both a grassroots level and also at a government level, and to be a broad masjid, if you like, representative of the diverse and varied British Muslim communities and beyond. We believe to truly bring together communities to build a stronger Britain, we should stand together shoulder to shoulder with other faith and no faith communities, and to work collaboratively with them to address prejudice, bigotry and hatred in all its forms. We do all of this rooted in the values of diversity, plurality, fairness and respect for all. Although the formal activities of the working group have been paused during the pandemic, our work certainly hasn't, and we have been working tirelessly to monitor and report online abuse, as well as offer solutions to tackling negative stereotypes through positive storytelling and narrative shifting, as well as doing capacity building. Our research over the past year has looked at the relationship between COVID-19 and online Islamophobia, with our report being downloaded over 2,700 times and cited in over 25 different articles. We also wrote a blog, a joint blog with Twitter on the subject matter. We've researched gendered Islamophobia. We've produced a video for Hate Crime Awareness Week on gendered Islamophobia. We have run numerous webinars, including one with the CPS about hate crimes. We've run webinars with the police to bring together the police and Muslim communities, webinars on interfaith solidarity with Lord John Mann, and also various webinars addressing COVID vaccine hesitancy and women of faith and leadership. We've submitted evidence to various inquiries throughout the year. So before we kick off this evening's speeches, I'd just like to say a heartfelt thanks to my fellow colleagues, the independent members of the Anti-Muslim Hatred Working Group, for their hard work behind the scenes. Some of them have joined us today: Imam Kari Yasim, Riaz Ravat, Kareem Sakoor and Farouk Mirza. I'd also like to finally say that we have been very fortunate to be able to partner with the Armed Forces Muslim Forum for today's event. I'd like to express my deep gratitude to all of them for partnering with us. I'm delighted to introduce to you my co-host for this evening, Sergeant Waziha Laha from the Armed Forces Muslim Forum. Over to you, Waziha.
Thank you for your introduction. I'm Waziha. I've been a sergeant in the Air Force for the last 10 years, but I've been in the Air Force for over 22 years. I joined as an intelligence analyst linguist, but currently I'm working for as an assistant to the Islamic advisor to CDS and service chiefs. I'm sure many of you know him, Imam Asim Hafiz. I'm a member of the Armed Forces Muslim Forum, of which both Akila and I are both members. It's an apolitical body which seeks to build and provide the Ministry of Defence's armed forces and Muslim communities with better opportunities for open, frank and honest dialogue, discussion and collaboration. I'm really pleased to say that the AFMF has partnered with the Anti-Muslim Hatred Working Group for this fabulous virtual iftar. I am hugely honoured to be working alongside Akila, and I hope you really enjoy the array of inspirational speakers tonight. So without further ado, I will introduce the first one, who is Corporal Abdoulie Jobe. He joined the army in 2004. He's now in the Royal Logistics Corps, and he was chosen in 2014 to represent the tri-services at the International Quran Military Competition in Saudi Arabia. The translation will be done by Dr. Muna Abdel Aziz, who is the Director of Public Health for Salford. Over to Abdullah.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إنما المؤمنون إخوة فأصلحوا بين أخويكم واتقوا الله لعلكم ترحمون. يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا يسخر قوم من قوم عسى أن يكونوا خيرا منهم ونساء من نساء عسى أن يكن خيرا منهن ولا تلمزوا أنفسكم ولا تنابزوا بالألقاب بئس الاسم الفسوق بعد الإيمان ومن لم يتب فأولئك هم الظالمون. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اجتنبوا كثيرا من الظن إن بعد الظن إثم ولا تجسسوا ولا يغتب بعضكم بعضا أيحب أحدكم أن يأكل لحم أخيه ميتا فكرهتموه واتقوا الله إن الله تواب رحيم. يا أيها الناس إنا خلقناكم من ذكر وأنثى وجعلناكم شعوبا وقبائل لتعارفوا إن أكرمكم عند الله أتقاكم إن الله عليم خبير. صدق الله العظيم.
Thank you very much, Abdullah, for beautiful recitation. I will read out the translation from the accredited translation of the Clear Quran, which is using more everyday English. In these verses of chapter 49, God is referring to himself with his name Allah. In the name of Allah, the most compassionate, most merciful. The believers are but one brotherhood, so make peace between your brothers, and be mindful of Allah, so that you may be shown mercy. O believers, do not let some men ridicule others, they may be better than them. Nor let some women ridicule other women, they may be better than them. Do not defame one another, nor call each other by offensive nicknames. How evil is it to act rebelliously after having faith? And whoever does not repent, it is they who are the true wrongdoers. O believers, avoid many suspicions, For indeed, some suspicions are sinful, and do not spy nor backbite one another. Would any of you like to eat the flesh of their dead brother? You would despise that. And fear Allah, surely Allah is the acceptor of repentance, most merciful. O humanity, indeed we created you from a male and a female, and made you into peoples and tribes so that you may get to know one another. Surely the most noble of you in the sight of Allah is the most righteous among you. Allah is truly all-knowing, all-aware. Alhamdulillah.
Thank you so much for that beautiful Quranic recitation, and thank you, Dr. Muna, for the wonderful translation. I'd now like to start off with our first speaker of the evening. If I could introduce everybody to Sofia Buncy, who is one of the UK's leading practitioners on the experiences of Muslim women in the criminal justice system. And I know that she does a lot of work with the Khidmat Centre in Bradford as well. Sofia, please, over to you. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum. Peace be with you all. First of all, thank you so much for this wonderful invite to such an auspicious occasion. It's wonderful to see that despite the obvious challenges we're all going through, every effort is still being made by communities across the board to keep connecting, to understand and to come together. So I'm very moved by that as well. As Akila said in the invitation, I do work at the Khidmat Centres, which is a grassroots-based organisation in Bradford. I'm actually still currently at work, and just prior to this call, I rushed out of our kitchens because what we were doing there was preparing an iftar alongside three young people for 60 asylum seeker and refugee communities in Bradford. That was something that we started doing at the start of the pandemic, and it is practice that we've continued on to this year as well. And it's not just about teaching young people about life skills, but it's an integral part of Islamic values as well. As a community-based organisation, at the start of the pandemic, we were working with communities that were quite vulnerable anyway, communities who were on low income, facing multiple deprivation and had a lot of internal challenges. And I guess with a lot of you across different sectors, there was the initial trepidation that we had back in March, when we were thinking about, do we leave our own households? Do we put ourselves at risk? Do we put our families at risk? Because we know how vulnerable these communities are. And do we go out onto the front line? And we were getting calls at the centre. People were knocking on because of the obvious impact of food poverty. So we decided, as people across many faiths did, to put our trust in God and go out into communities and really serve. And some of the core principles of Islam are servitude, compassion, neighbourliness. And one of the first things that I had to learn to do was set up a food bank and a hot food provision, something I'd never done before, but something that so many people across the country were learning to do. I think quite often community workers, and especially interfaith workers, can be the unsung heroes in communities. We're not as highlighted as other sectors, other people on the front line, but it is, you know, we are just as frontline as those other people. And if anything, we're scrambling around for meagre resources to be able to do that. Just as we're catering for Ramadan Iftar at the moment, we did find that we were really playing things by ear and learning to respond to needs. So I know this year was the 9th annual Christmas dinner that we were due to host at the Khidmat Centre of Christian elders as well. And we were getting some really upset elders calling the centre in the lead up to Christmas in October and November, saying that they couldn't face the possibility of spending Christmas on their own as well, having been alone since March. So again, we had to change some of our operations and do an at-home delivery service. So we took Christmas to a lot of elderly people in their houses this year, which as an interfaith worker really meant a lot to me. My work is quite specialist, and it's, you know, it has been a challenge for me not being able to go into the prison service since March actually. So there's a lot of vulnerable prisoners that we have across the board who, unfortunately, if you don't know, have been on a 23.5-hour lockup behind their cell door. So they'll have half an hour to come out for exercise, they'll have half an hour to in the yard or maybe to shower, and then they're quickly, I guess for their own safety as well, sent back to their cells. So again, this Ramadan we've run a community campaign where the community has helped us fundraise just over £3,000 for prisoner Ramadan packs, and we've been able to provide those to those that are in custody that are observing Ramadan in this really difficult time, and give them the Quran, copies of the Quran books, any breakout packs, and anything that they may need to stay connected with their families as well. And I think it was important for us to do, but highlight, I guess, the invisible plight of those that are going through the pandemic as well. The other areas that we've really had to adapt, and I think for the first time in my career, although interfaith work and community development can stay quite, I guess, there's a clear demarcation and they're quite distinct amongst themselves, is learn to really work a lot closer with faith institutes and have some of our practice inform faith institutes. One of the landmark things that happened in Bradford was, prior to the public announcement of the lockdown, we managed to work through our mother organisation, Council for Mosques, and it was proactive way and proactive thinking, where I guess community development workers were enforcing some of the very real facts and statistics that came with the pandemic onto the mosques, and we use the Muslim Doctors Associations to inform the mosques and introduce a policy within our mosques and Islamic jurisprudence that actually we would close our own mosques here in Bradford. So prior to the government announcement, we were able to be really quite honest with ourselves as a community as to the implications that may arise for us. And I think in that sense, we were very lucky that we had a community that did comply. You know, there was harmony throughout, there wasn't any disruption. And inevitably, a few months ago, we were also able to set up the first vaccination hub within the Central Mosque in Bradford. So that was really encouraging, especially when we were pushing out messages around, you know, community safety and people taking up the vaccine. I think it has been an incredibly challenging time for all communities across the board, but I've been so encouraged by, I guess, the humanity, the faith values, as well as just ordinary people from the streets just reaching out to help. You know, things are easing up, things may get easier, but you know, these services are so much more needed, and the message that I would like to give and the message that I leave with is that the human spirit inevitably prevails and our will to do good. Thank you.
Thank you, Sofia, for that. Before I introduce our next speaker, I'd just like to give some information about the Q&A chat function. So if you've got any questions today, just put them in the Q&A and we'll moderate them and we'll get them back to you. And also, if you're on Twitter, our hashtag is Iftar with the Frontline. So that's hashtag Iftar with the Frontline. And now our next speaker is Major General Duncan, who is Commandant of the Royal Military Academy Sandhurst and is Director Leadership of the Army.
Assalamu alaikum. Thanks, Wazir. I'd like to start by saying a huge thank you to Akila and the Anti-Muslim Hatred Working Group and to AFMA for setting up this evening's event and inviting me to speak briefly. It really has been an exceptionally difficult year. I started in this job as Commandant at Sandhurst literally just as we hit the lockdown, and I was pulled back almost immediately into my previous job to release my successor, who was involved with military support to the pandemic. And both in that role and as Commandant Sandhurst, I've had a number of interactions with our Muslim personnel over the last year, and I'm aware just how difficult it's been for them, and also, as Sofia says, for all faith communities to practice their faiths during the pandemic. I think, though, despite every challenge, it's been really reassuring just to see how supportive people have been to one another, you know, both in the military, but more widely across civil society. And I think it'd be great this evening to hear, you know, from all of those communities and from our various Muslim speakers this evening, to listen to how they've helped and been key in the fight against the virus, really coming together as one community. And part of that, we'll hear Captain Johnny Herron tonight, who's a Muslim doctor currently serving with the army, who's going to share his experiences of supporting his civilian colleagues as part of the military's wider response to the National Health Service when we were asked to provide support. I think one thing that's become abundantly clear during the last year is that when the chips really are down and we're faced with adversity, communities do come together in order to work towards that common goal. It is therefore depressing that despite this, there are those who would try to manipulate any situation and try and sow division by trying to present alternative narratives, false narratives. And I think in that respect, the work of the Anti-Muslim Hatred Working Group really is vital in highlighting these groups and these individuals. And it's also important to note the regular work between our group and the armed forces, which I firmly support personally. I recall the visit that we had last year to the initial recruit training facility at Pirbright from a group of women from the group. And the feedback we received from the ladies that came was really phenomenal in terms of how it had sort of helped shape their perceptions and perhaps improve their understanding of what we did. And we're keen to continue doing that. More important for me, though, the visit demonstrated our shared values and beliefs, which of course are the best bulwark against those who would try to promote negativity and particularly try to use the military to drive a wedge between civil society and our Muslim friends. And I really very much look forward to hosting the group again this time at Sandhurst, which as probably most of you will be aware, is where we train not just British Army officer cadets, but a number from our international friends and allies. So this evening's not about recruiting, but it would be important to me, I think, to promote the fact that a career in the armed forces does have real potential for those who selflessly serve others, a value and a commitment held dear by the Muslim community, and especially demonstrated during Ramadan. I'd also like to share briefly an example of camaraderie in the army and an example of the ethos within our organisation. Currently, there's a group of trainee soldiers of the Royal Signals who are based in Devon, who are currently planning to complete a series of fitness exercises which will see the group cover 4,884 kilometres, which is the distance between their location in Devon and Mecca. So they came up with the idea of doing that as a mark of respect towards their Muslim colleagues who obviously are still observing Ramadan while training. And what they've worked out is if they do it quickly enough, they're going to do the return leg as well, and they're doing it all for charity. So good luck to them. So this evening is not my only engagement during Ramadan. I've got a virtual call later on with serving Muslims during May, and I'm also looking forward to hearing their experiences. I've also intend to attend a couple of the iftars with our international and our British Muslim cadets at Sandhurst, which is usually done really well. So in closing, really, I'd like to wish you the very best for the remainder of what is this really important month. I'd also like to take this opportunity to recognise those Muslim personnel who are on duty in the UK and overseas who are observing Ramadan. May I also wish you a very, very early Eid Mubarak. And I hope that this year, really unlike last year, may offer you the opportunity to celebrate properly with friends and families. Thank you.
Thank you so much, General Duncan, and thank you for the kind and supportive words. I don't think I'd be able to do that walk for charity. Fasting and staying hungry all day sounds so much easier, but amazing to hear their story. And, you know, thank you so much for your continued support. I'd now like to introduce our next speaker, if I may. I'd like to introduce Lord Stephen Greenhalgh, who is MHCLG's Minister of State for Building, Safety, Fire and Communities. So welcome, Lord Greenhalgh. Thank you so much for giving up your time today. Over to you. I think you might be on mute.
Very sorry, it was a schoolboy error. Salam alaikum and to you all, and it's a great privilege to participate. I think it's my second time at your invitation, Akila, so thank you for inviting me again. And as some of you may know, I'm the Faith Minister amongst other responsibilities, and I've really how faith communities, including Muslims, have mobilized so quickly in what's been a terrible pandemic. It's amazing work from organizations across the board. I don't want to mention any in particular, but I will. The Muslim Charities Forum have really helped, going out of their way to feed hungry lorry drivers right in the run up to Christmas, when everyone got stranded on the A20. in Kent. That was incredibly impressive. And we've seen the mosques as well as cathedrals, gurdwaras, synagogues becoming part of the vaccination program. Having lost my own mother in the first wave of the pandemic, it's great to see finally that so many of us are taking the vaccination that's making us safe. And I know that that my boss Robert Jenrick visited the Al Abbas Islamic Centre in Birmingham. But we've also seen, many places of worship, because either we be full-blown vaccination centres or pop-up vaccination centres. It's really all inspiring to see how faith communities have been right at the front line in this pandemic and supporting our communities. I have to say, it's obviously a special time at Ramadan, a moment of reflection, peace, and compassion for all Muslims. And it's great that you're bringing everybody of all faiths. I'm a Roman Catholic for what it's worth, but it's great to join you all across every faith and show our unity and support for one another. It's marvelous, and equally, it's important for us to reflect that we're aware that there's still this discrimination and intolerance that Muslim communities have to endure. And I know that from my current role, but also I was pre-deputy mayor for policing, and I want to commend another organisation, Tell Mama, and all they do to support people to come forward and report hate crime and anti-Muslim hate crime, and the work that this group does as well. And we're doing our bit as a government to safeguard mosques and places of worship. We're committed about 3.2 million for the places of worship security grant this year, and we continue to tackle anti-Muslim hatred. We've invested around 2.8 million over the last 5 years. But we know there's more to do to combat the scourge of Islamophobia. Now, I'm aware that, and this is all about the front line, I'm aware as a son of a doctor just how many Muslims are there at the front line in our wonderful NHS during this pandemic, and whether it's doctors, nurses, volunteers, care workers. I just want to thank all of you for what you've done in what is, such a momentous national effort, and affected families right from the top of the country to the bottom. It's been a really difficult time, and also congratulate you for raising millions of pounds for the needy during Ramadan, and it's just the British Muslims provide a real model of what can be done and also I commend you also for embracing technology and having the virtual iftar. I mean, I know it breaks the habits of a lifetime when you're used to to celebrating Ramadan in a certain way, but we've really been able to embrace technology, but hopefully with the ongoing vaccination program we can begin to return to a future where doing things differently can recede, and we begin to go back to certainly a newer a normal. And I hope working together we can continue to make progress towards a world where things like the Big Iftar, which I remember the Big Iftar initiative, can return, and that although the mosques are open, that they can enable to go back to worship as you'll be used to worshipping. Certainly services in churches are very different from the way they were conducted pre-pandemic, and also where we can mark important events like this face to face. I'd love to visit Sandhurst, by the way. I'll take any invitation to visit somewhere as glorious as Sandhurst. But for now, I'd like to wish all of those who are observing Ramadan a peaceful and blessed month, especially for those that continue to work in the front line. This is all about the front line this evening. And to all of you and your families, Ramadan Mubarak.
Thank you so much, Lord Greenhalgh. And I'm, on behalf of everybody, I'm so sorry to hear about the passing of your mother. I would like to pass on our condolences. As a member of the NHS CCG in Brighton, I have seen the incredible amount of work that has gone into the vaccination programme to ensure that everybody takes up the vaccine. And I'm, with great relief, both my parents are vaccinated. So it's just really credit to everybody involved in the NHS and in delivering that vaccination programme. Without further ado, I'd like to now introduce our next speaker. Our next speaker also was a faith minister, I think, at some point, Lord Tariq Ahmad of Wimbledon. He is currently the Minister of State for South Asia and the Commonwealth at the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office. Thank you so much for being here today. Over to you, Lord Tariq Ahmad.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. It's a real pleasure to join you and see so many familiar faces, albeit virtually on this occasion. You're quite right, Akila. In a former incarnation as a former minister of faith at the MHCLG, as is today, but CLG that was. It's a real delight to be joining you here this evening. I must admit, when we look at the basis of Ramzan and what it requires one to do from dawn to dusk, to fast, and a range of other areas for anyone partaking in Ramzan. One of the real challenges one faces, if I can just reflect personally as a politician, as you can imagine, is that we're also told as Muslims that you shouldn't and you should avoid confrontation. You shouldn't engage in quarrels or indeed any kind of debates or discussions. And you can imagine what the challenge that brings for someone who is in a very kind of combative sort of set up in Parliament, and indeed returning just home from Parliament. I'm very conscious of the challenges everyone faces in terms of their occupations. But that said, may I begin by first of all thanking you for the sterling work that the group does. I know from past experience about the important role you fulfill and our faith communities fulfill in this respect. It is, as Stephen just said a few moments ago, a real challenge that remains within our country, that there are some who, rather than unite, seek to divide and use false narratives to create further discourse. It is therefore important that the work of the Anti-Muslim Hatred Working Group is strengthened further to ensure that communities do have their voice heard. I've seen over the years the strengthening of legislation, the strengthening of policy and programs which protect all faith communities. And it's important we never lose sight of that important attribute. When I travel around the world, as I've been fortunate enough to do so, we pride ourselves on defending freedom of religion or belief around the globe. But that stems from the strength of what we have here in the United Kingdom. When you look at the rich tapestry of faith, you know, with church steeples and church spires, we have gurdwaras, we have mandirs, we have synagogues, and yes, we have the minarets of mosques. And it's a reflection of the real strength of the country in celebrating its diversity, which should never be perceived as a weakness, but a real strength. And in this, the Muslim community plays a phenomenal role in its contribution in all sectors of society. And as we've heard already, whether it's within military circles or in the front line when it comes to our NHS, Muslim doctors, nurses, and others, professionals have played an absolutely pivotal role in ensuring that we today stand as one of the leading countries in terms of the vaccination rollout. I would once again, though, throw some caution to the wind that we're not out of the pandemic. When we look at some of the challenges around us with our near neighbors, it's quite obvious that the pandemic still is impacting us. Therefore, it's important, of course, for everyone to get out and get vaccinated when you're called for the vaccination, but not be complacent. Therefore, I once again wish to stress and thank at the same time the Muslim community in particular. Here we are during our second Ramadan. Who would have thought last year when we went through that first, what we thought would be quite a unique experience, that we would be doing the majority of our iftars at home, the majority of our prayers at home. And Ramzan, as we know, is a time of coming together with friends and family. It's a time of coming together within mosques and communities. Therefore, it's a great tribute to the British Muslim community that, again, they're adhering to the principles and indeed the limitations which are currently still being imposed on the communities around the United Kingdom. But hopefully, inshallah, with God's help and God's blessings, we shall see the continuing progress that we've made on the vaccinations. And in that regard, once again, we look forward to meeting again in person. The final thing, and just a reflection, if I may, I think we all have reflections of what the lockdown experience has meant. As I look around some of the people joining us, it's again enriched by the fact that we see the likes of the esteemed Rabbi Mirvis also joining our iftar this evening. And I think in that respect, it's a reflection of the strength of communities, but that all of us have come together. I was asked recently, what is the biggest learning of the lockdown for you? And in this regard, what I wish to share is a simple element of my own learning, whether it's within my own home, within my own family, within my own neighbors, within my own town or city, within our own country, or indeed internationally. Each and every one of us have learned the strength of the interdependency of humanity, the need and how much we rely on each other, how much we need each other. And if that can be a real learning and legacy of the lockdown and the pandemic, that we a real strengthened sense of that will prevail. Inshallah, I wish you all well for Ramzan. May the barakat and the blessings of Ramzan be with you. And as we approach Eid al-Fitr at the end of Ramzan, regrettably, it will not be before the current restrictions end, but I implore upon all of you to please, whilst you do celebrate, do so with safety and security. And it is a duty of everyone, of every faith, to be responsible to oneself, but equally through our conduct and actions, to be responsible to others as well as a community as a whole. So Ramzan Mubarak to you, with the peace and blessings of this blessed month to all those who are undertaking Ramzan. Wa akhiru dawana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.
Thank you so much, Lord Ahmad and Ameen. And you're absolutely right. We are not out of the pandemic yet. We still have to make sure that we are proceeding cautiously and within the guidelines. But it is nice to be able to connect virtually over, online with our communities in this way, and maybe see a few family or friends around Eid time, inshallah. So I'd now like to hand over to Imam Asim Hafiz, who is going to introduce the Chief Rabbi for us. Imam Asim Hafiz is the Islamic advisor to the Armed Forces and the MOD, and he is also part of the Armed Forces Muslim Forum. Thank you so much, Imam Asim. Over to you.
Assalamu alaikum. Peace and blessings be on everyone. Good evening. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. In the name of God, the most merciful, the most compassionate. First of all, I'd like to thank all the great speakers we've had, and for the Anti-Muslim Hatred Working Group, Akila and her team, for partnering with the Armed Forces Muslim Forum to deliver this amazing virtual iftar with the great speakers that we've had. Before I introduce the Chief Rabbi, just some thoughts that I would like to share with you. Some people like to think that why should we celebrate or recognize people on the front line? Why should we celebrate or recognize people in the NHS, in the armed forces, or in the community, in the voluntary sector? And because that's what they've signed up to do, that's their job. Well, in my view, we celebrate and recognize them because it is their job. And because they did sign up to do it. That's why we celebrate them. And on top of all of that, we celebrate not just them as individuals, but we celebrate the rigor, the commitment, the selflessness, and the values with which they do their jobs. Those values are honorable, and it's only right that we celebrate and champion those values within our society. And they give us the reassurance that when we need them the most, they will be there for us. In Islam, we are taught that you cannot be thankful of God. In other words, you cannot be a true believer until and unless you are thankful of people. And in my view, other people can be God's gift to us. And the work that the people in the NHS, in the armed forces, and the voluntary sector do for us, as we've heard so far, is an amazing gift from God to us. Saves lives, challenges tyranny, protects freedoms, and gives people opportunities that they may not have had otherwise. And the values with which they operate are the same values that people of faith live with. So there should be no problem in celebrating these individuals and the values which they serve. And as we know, Ramadan is a month of sacrifice, a month of discipline, and a month of spiritual reinvigoration. It is a month in which compassion, generosity, and kindness is at its peak, as we've heard Lord Ahmad very eloquently say. A time when giving even a sip of water is seen as giving away a whole ocean. It is one of the best times to remember those who have done so much for us. If there's anything, as Lord Ahmad also said, the COVID crisis has taught us, is that we as a humanity are not disconnected and disparate, but we are more interconnected, intrinsically linked, and interdependent on each other than we would like to actually know or believe. So, why should someone hate Muslims when the person that might be saving your loved one's life, or maybe even your life, could very well be Muslim? Why should someone hate a Jewish person when the one preventing your loved one from becoming a victim of a terrorist attack could be someone from the Jewish community? Why hate or dislike someone who is different to you when the person who you might need the most might be from that very community? This interconnectedness reminds me of a saying of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, in which he said that all people, all humanity are like one body. If one part hurts or is in pain, then the whole body is in pain and is in discomfort. You cannot disconnect one limb from another. So he established the universality of humanity and understood that the only way that we can live in this world is through respect and dignity. So it's disappointing that there are tiny minority who have capitalized on the pandemic to divide communities, but the overwhelming majority continue to lay foundations of peace, respect, and harmony. And one such person who is at the forefront of building those bridges is our Cheif Rabbi, who we have the pleasure and honor to have with us. Cheif Rabbi Mirvis is only the 11th Rabbi of the United Hebrew Congregations of the Commonwealth and the United Kingdom, since the office was introduced in 1704. Cheif Rabbi Mirvis was installed on the 1st of September 2013 in a historic ceremony, which was attended by His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales, the first time that a member of the royal family has attended a service for the installation of a Cheif Rabbi. Cheif Rabbi Mirvis has earned a reputation as one of the UK's most respected community rabbis in the country. Cheif Rabbi, it's a pleasure to have you. You'll be interested to know that when we advertised our virtual iftar, someone asked me why there was a very senior Jewish religious person speaking, but there was no someone very senior Muslim speaking. So first of all, I was offended by that. Secondly, I explained to the individual that the Jewish faith is the senior of the Abrahamic faiths, and the Cheif Rabbi is the senior of the Jewish community, and therefore there's no reason why he can't speak on behalf of all of us. And I'd also like to share a very nice story with you. Every day in the month of Ramadan, we are breaking our fast, my family and I, with dates that were sent to us by a rabbi friend of ours who lives in London, and those dates were harvested or grown in Palestine. So we're breaking our fast with Palestinian dates, which were given to us by a very good rabbi friend of ours. Thank you very much for joining us in your very busy schedule, and over to you, sir.
Thank you so much. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much, Imam, for your very kind and warm words of welcome, which I really, really appreciate. It's an enormous pleasure for me to be with you all here this evening. My congratulations to the hosting groups, to the Anti-Muslim Hatred Working Group and the Armed Forces Muslim Forum. I'd also like to thank Imam Kariasim, who extended the invitation to me to speak here this evening, and I'd like to congratulate Imam Kariasim for his outstanding work in advancing interfaith dialogue and understanding in Britain. I'd also like to congratulate two previous speakers that I was so delighted to hear, Lord Greenhalgh, who in his capacity as minister is doing so much to highlight the importance of places of worship as an essential facility for our nation during this very trying time, and for everything he's doing for the sake of religion in this country. And also Lord Ahmad, who on a global stage is doing so much to advance interfaith understanding and dialogue. This evening, in the few minutes that I have at my disposal, I would like to share with you some thoughts about 4 words. The first word is mishpacha. It's the Hebrew for family. Now, why is that so important for us right now? COVID-19 has taught us that we're all on the same side. The virus doesn't differentiate between different genders, faiths, colors, creeds. The virus doesn't recognize borders. As far as the virus is concerned, everyone on earth is the enemy. We are all on the same side. And isn't that a message from God during these challenging times, that all of humankind needs to respond as people who are all on the same side? And that is particularly the case with regard to Jews and Muslims, because we are part of Mishpacha. We are family. We come from originally the same parenthood. We are cousins. And you know, when people are part of the same family and they live under the same roof, often they would get on well together. Sometimes they might not. But even when there are differences, because you're part of the same family, you are committed to sorting things out. And that surely must be the tone and the mood of Jewish-Muslim relations during these trying times, and indeed at all times. My second word is the word tolerance. Now, our common ancestor, Abraham the patriarch, was somebody who extended a huge amount of consideration to others, but that wasn't necessarily always the case. We have a midrash, that's a rabbinic teaching from 2,000 years ago, which goes as follows. Abraham used to welcome into his tent strangers. In fact, his tent had 4 openings, one on each side, to people to receive people from all directions. And what happened was, strangers would come in, he would place food before them, but before they partook of the food, he would say, I want to teach you about a blessing. And he would tell the person about God, about the fact that God has enabled us to have food to eat and liquid to drink. And having done so, the person would bless, and then that person would be brought into the canopy of Abraham's faith. But on one occasion, a 70-year-old idolater was a guest in Abraham's tent. Abraham sat him down, he greeted him with much fanfare, put some food in front of him, and he said, before you eat, I want to teach you about a blessing. The man said, well, what's a blessing? Abraham said, it's about the one true God. The man said, I don't believe in your God, I believe in my idols. Abraham tried to explain. The man said, I'm not interested in this. Whereupon Abraham said, if that's the case, you're not welcome in my tent. And he drove the man out. And just a few moments later, a voice came from heaven, and God said to Abraham, I have tolerated that man's idolatry for 70 years. Could you not tolerate him for 5 minutes? Now, the message is clear to all of us, but actually the term tolerance is not good enough. Tolerance in English comes from the Latin, which means to bear, to endure. It's a negative term, therefore. Tolerance in Hebrew is sovlanut, coming from the Hebrew word sovel, which means to suffer, indicating, I'm really having a difficult time being with you, but you know what? I'll bear it for the sake of peace. That's not such a great term. There is a better term. It's the term in Arabic for tolerance, which is tasamuh. Tasamuh means with understanding, with love, let's work together. It's a positive statement, and that's what the world needs, far more than tolerance. We need to have tasamuh. And this iftar this evening is a wonderful reflection of tasamuh, of people coming together with understanding, absolutely committed to getting on well together, regardless of any differences or any different points of origin that we might have. My third word is the Hebrew word yonah. It's in the Bible. It's in the book of Genesis. During the story of the flood, Noah sent a yonah out of the ark. Yonah is a dove. But you know that the Hebrew word for pigeon is also yonah. So if you say yonah, it depends on the context. Isn't that amazing? For 2 creatures, a dove and a pigeon. And why is that the case? And I'll tell you. You see, a dove is a symbol of peace. A pigeon is a symbol of communication, because the pigeon is a carrier bird to connect people. And the message of the yonah is, you cannot have peace without communication. The two go hand in hand. And that is so crucial, and that's so important. And that's why I readily welcome this invitation for me to communicate, for us to speak together. Because once we speak together in a friendly and warm manner, then we're well on the road to long-lasting peace. And the final word, my 4th word, is hope. What's the Hebrew word for hope? It is tikva. And the first place that the word appears is in the book of Joshua chapter 2, where Spies come into the city of Jericho, and a tikva is lowered from a window in the wall. Tikva is a rope. So in Hebrew, rope and hope are the same word. And why is that the case? Because the rope is a fusion of different strands. One single strand by itself is easily breakable, but if you combine a whole lot of strands together to produce a rope, it's unbreakable. And that's why it's the same term as hope, because there is hope in this world when people come together and they forge a rope-styled, united, combined entity. And as such, we as a society will simply be unbreakable. We will be strong. We will be united when we join together in peace and in friendship. That indeed is the spirit of this iftar. Thank you so much for inviting me to be with you, to share a few thoughts. May God bless all of you in your endeavors during the holy month of Ramadan. And may our collaboration, may our dialogue, may our understanding lead not just to tolerance. Let's have tasammuh, and let's, please God, have a wonderful society as we move out of COVID towards the post-COVID era. God bless you all.
Thank you so much for that, Cheif Rabbi. That's such beautiful, inspirational stories, and I'm sure we've learned a lot from what you've said today, and I really hope we can move forward with peace. I just want to remind everyone that we do have a hashtag, Iftar with the Frontline. It's on Twitter if you want to join in. And also, if you have got any questions for any of our panelists, then please do put them in the Q&A function. And so our next speaker is Captain Johnathan Herron, who is currently serving with HQ Army Medical Services and has worked on the front line.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much for inviting me. And thank you to everyone. First of all, I'd just like to start off telling a story of how I became involved, really. So my father-in-law, Saeed, he became very ill with COVID initially in February last year, and was in intensive care for quite some time. There was many times we thought he wasn't going to live. So together we prayed for him, and inshallah he pulled through. But the Armed Forces Muslim Association was one of the communities that really helped me come through that. And so for me, that made me want to give back. So I asked my commanding officer if I could volunteer to do some further roles, and he obligingly allowed me. So first thing I did was I worked as one of the clinical leads for the COVID tracing center. So I was looking at communities and seeing where the clusters of outbreaks were and how we could contain clusters and prevent the COVID spread and the contact tracing that comes with that. Talking to people about where they had been and the types of activities they had been doing. So we managed to control it quite well at the time. I was in Northern Ireland, and it was one of the fewest numbers. We had maybe 15, 20 a week. So we were doing quite well. I think part of it was being sensitive towards the communities that we were working with. Once you lose the trust from those communities, then they don't engage with you. And I think bringing that sort of sensitive side to things helped us in that matter. So after I moved on from that role, I then moved into intensive care, where I was looking after the sickest people. And that was quite a big role for me because I had such a personal connection with it. My father-in-law had been in that situation not very long before, and looking after people who were on their final days and final hours, final breath, was quite rewarding, because I was able to pray with some of those people and give them hope and give them comfort that there was somebody else in the journey with them. I think that a lot of people, there was many people that thanked me for that, firstly, but I think a lot of people gained some sort of comfort from that. And I feel that really was much more of an additional role that I was able to add, rather than just looking after the care medically. And after that role, I have done quite a lot in this. I moved to the vaccinations. So I had volunteered to do vaccination training for the vaccinators. And a lot of that was dispelling misinformation, teaching people how to connect with communities. And there was a lot of distrust in some communities, and some people didn't believe that the vaccine was safe or that their religion had approved it. And so a lot of it was engaging with those types of things, and particularly with the Muslim communities, ensuring that people had the correct information, that they had the correct religious advice, that they knew what they were allowed and what they weren't allowed to do. And I think that that's helped a lot, because I was able to connect. I had the very, very big privilege of connecting with a lot of people that were able to then connect with many, many, many others. And I feel that in some small way, just by adding those little extra bits, those people might have gained some one thing from me, but I gained a lot more from them. And I learned how they approach different things. And I learned a lot about myself. So I feel that as a Muslim who's giving back, this has been as much a learning opportunity and as much a growth opportunity for me as it has been to help other people. And without God, I don't know how I would have managed to do what I have done, and I don't understand how other people are able to cope as well as they do without that influence. But I hope that in some small way I've given hope and peace to people who were in their last final days in particular. And I would like to thank you all for having me just to tell my story. So Ramadan Mubarak, inshallah.
Thank you very much, Captain Herron. Really inspiring stories. Thank you. And I would now like to introduce Dr. Kiran Rahim, who is an NHS doctor specialising in baby, child and adolescent health, and currently works in London as a paediatrician, and she has worked on the COVID ward as well.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. They have been some very moving words, both from Imam Asim and Cheif Rabbi, and thank you for the beautiful reminders. So I'm Kiran, I am a NHS doctor. I work in the East End of London, so in quite deprived communities, and I am a paediatrician, so predominantly I work with children. And actually, when the pandemic hit, I was working in Homerton, which is a lovely little hospital in northeast London, and there were staff shortages because people, the first wave hit us really bad, and so I was asked, and I felt incredibly honoured, and felt it was my duty of irrespective of race. And so off I went to ITU, and ITU was a harrowing experience, and you can probably hear it in my voice. It's an experience I wouldn't wish upon anyone, because it was in ITU, like Captain Herron said, you saw the desperation of humanity, and you actually saw what it meant to die alone without support. And Homerton is a really lovely little hospital. We have a lovely community of faith. So we have our imams who come in and do the chaplaincy services. We also have a really great Orthodox Jewish community. So the rabbis will come in. And so when people normally die and when children die, it's a very beautiful affair. So they have their faith, they have their families. And ITU wasn't that. People were isolated, and I felt such sorrow, and I still feel it a year on, thinking about how people that were potentially my aunts, my uncles, some of them would have been my colleagues, and some of them were my colleagues, and watching them pass and passing alone taught me lessons that actually we all hold on to so many things about what we value in life, and actually what we all value, or we should, is human connection.
and the spirit of community and what it means to be there for one another. Because I held hands with Jewish patients, I held hands with Black patients, I held hands with Muslims or people of no faith, and tried to offer whatever I could in their final moments, because there was no one else. And it's interesting when people say, you know, you signed up to do this job. I did sign up to do the job, and I'm immensely grateful to God's grace. I am able to serve people in their final moments of life. But what I didn't sign up for was a trauma that comes with witnessing people like that, of witnessing, you know, death in such monumental scales. It honestly, at some points, it felt like I can't compare it to a war zone, but I can compare it to not knowing what on earth to do in people's final moments. Who should we run to? Who should we save? Which family do we call first? Who do we break the bad news to? And then the pandemic left us, and we came out of the first wave into normality. And then I remember thinking, God, that was really awful. What do I do now? And we recovered. You know, I unfortunately, I recognized how hard I found it. So I knew I couldn't go back to ITU, and I volunteered for a really great organization called the British Islamic Medical Association. And so I focused my services there, and we worked within our communities to provide education for the Muslim community regarding COVID vaccination. And we encouraged it. We worked with the NHS to promote flu uptake so that we could prevent the wider community. And when the second wave hit, we went back and we did it all again. And some of us are still doing it. And I can't thank people that have come forward with their messages of support, of unity, of prayers, because all of us have needed prayers to get us through, to help us survive. And actually, I can't thank our faith leaders, because I have leaned on my faith leader so much in the last year. And I continue to do so, because the trauma of losing colleagues and patients and people that you used to see walking around corridors that are no longer there, it doesn't leave you for a while. And because we're still experiencing those deaths, you know, not a day goes by where we don't listen to someone else that unfortunately has succumbed to COVID. I want to say that our faith leaders and our interfaith relationships have really, really helped us as a community to survive this, and we continue to survive this. And inshallah, as you know, this month is all about unity and spiritual development and growth. I hope we all remember that it is our duty as good Muslims, as members of our community, to practice it as safely as possible. And that includes Eid, like Lord Ahmad said, to, you know, we're not out of it yet. There are still people like me in ITUs, people like Captain Herron in ITUs where we don't belong, trying to survive, trying to do the best we can. And in order to do that, we need the community. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rahim. Heartbreaking stories, and I'm sure everybody who's listening would also like to say thank you to you as well. I'd now like to introduce our next speaker, Mark Eastwood, who is the MP for Dewsbury and is the Vice Chairman of the APPG on British Muslims.
Good evening. Thank you. Thank you for the invitation to this event tonight. And all I can say is what a moving and emotional speech from Dr. Rahim there. And I'm sort of wondering how I follow that, to be honest, but I will do my best. Yes, as you've mentioned, I am the MP for Dewsbury. I'm the Vice Chair of the APPG for British Muslims. I was also proud to have co-signed, when I was co-chair of the APPG for British Muslims, the Rising to the Challenge report about the amazing work that the British Muslim community has put in throughout all the communities across the country. And it's been, you know, if there's anything that's, we can take one positive out of the pandemic, it's the work that's been done in helping to deliver food parcels the vulnerable in the communities. I've worked with a number of local charities and mosques like the Moonlight Trust, the Zachariah Education Centre, the Darul Ilm Mosque. And what that does is, and the great work that the Anti-Muslim Hatred Working Group does, what that does is it brings communities together, and it promotes understanding and engagement between Muslim community and the wider community. And I think that is one way that we can try and tackle, Islamophobia and anti-Muslim hatred within the communities. And I'm really proud that people in my constituency have all come together, and we've been delivering food parcels from what you say predominantly Muslim communities into the white community. Everybody's been really thankful and grateful for that, and that's something that I really wanted to highlight tonight when talking to you all. And thanks again for inviting me to my first virtual iftar. When I met with Roxana and Akila, I said that I would accept the invite to this iftar this evening on the basis that I would fast for today. And Roxana and Akila have asked me to share that experience. So I hope you don't mind. I don't want to be too self-indulgent, but I would like to share the experience of fasting for one day. I have done this on previous years, and it's always difficult in June when obviously the nights are lighter. So today I started my fast in the morning. I went out delivering. We're in an election period, so I was delivering election leaflets, very, very busy. I welcomed a government minister to Dewsbury, and we went to Savile Town, which is a very predominantly Asian Muslim area in my community. The first time a minister's come down there. So I've been really busy all day. And actually, I didn't feel too bad. Now, you might find my voice a little bit croaky at the moment. So the busyness kept me, and I've spoke to obviously some of my Muslim colleagues, and they said, oh yes, it's when you keep busy, you don't actually realise that you're not drinking and eating. I think it really hit me when I sat down this evening to prepare for this event. And my colleague and office manager, he actually brought me a parcel of food. So he's brought me a nice little parcel there, which I'll be eating at 8:30 tonight. And what I found is that I'm actually feeling a bit tired now, I have to say. I'm really not thinking straight, so I'm hoping that I'm coming across quite well on this one. I don't feel that thirsty. I feel a little bit hungry, but I understand that everybody goes through this on a daily basis, making the sacrifices. And I think, it's a difficult experience for me to do it in one day. Although I would like to say I'm looking forward to January, and I'll probably do it in every day in January when we have 6 hours of daylight. So really, I just wanted to say thank you so much for inviting me to this event tonight. I hope I haven't been rambling because I can't think straight because I've been fasting all day. But it's been a great event, and I'd like to go obviously to future events. And Ramadan Mubarak to everybody. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for sharing your experiences. I'm also feeling quite hungry and thirsty, if I'm honest. And it does get easier in the winter months, you're absolutely right. But no, thank you so much for sharing your experiences and sharing in Ramadan with us. I'd now like to introduce Dr. Muna Abdel Aziz. She is the Director for Public Health for Salford. And she has been instrumental in responding to test and trace and some of the COVID responses in the area in Salford and Manchester. So thank you so much for joining us. Dr. Muna, over to you.
Thank you very much. I'm really pleased to join you all, and I'm really happy to be listening to such inspiring speeches before me. So public health, well, the COVID pandemic is one of the largest public health emergencies of our lives, and public health has been right in the center of this. In this iftar with the Frontline, I wanted to celebrate the work of public health teams, council teams, social care in particular, and care homes in keeping people safe during the pandemic. Particularly, the care homes have been really devastated at the start in the very first wave. And it's reminiscent of what Dr. Kiran was saying about the impact of bereavement in our care homes. So public health really is about prevention. It's about making sure that we mitigate the impact of the pandemic. And the impacts have been, some of them have been direct because the virus affects some people more than others. And also some of the impacts have been indirect due to the restrictions and lockdowns. So for example, the impact on mental health and well-being, the impacts of bereavement that we know people are suffering from, and also, you know, the impacts on education, the fact that children, young people have missed schools. So all of these services can go back to normal once they're COVID secure. So what does COVID secure mean? It's a new normal, therefore. It is a new normal where we still have to maintain the social distancing. We still have to hands, face, space. And remember, ventilation as well has been added in, especially as we're heading into summer. So it is safer for people to be outdoors than indoors. And the easing of restrictions is meant to take place in a very steady staged way, so we do not kickstart a new wave. And we're really proud to be one of the first countries which has rolled out the vaccination program. And we urge people who have been invited. You've been invited because you're a priority. You've been invited because you're at high risk, either because of the virus impact on you, or because you're most exposed, for example, people who work in the front line. So the vaccination program, really pleased to announce that 60%, more than 60% of adult population of the UK have been vaccinated. But that's not enough for herd immunity. People who have been vaccinated, even with one dose, should have the second dose as well, and should still maintain all the infection control precautions. So what have we been doing in public health? Well, Akila mentioned test and trace, and so did Captain Herron as well. So the fact that we are running testing programs, that we are running the contact tracing. The most important advice to people is if you're unwell, stay at home, because then you might not be passing on the virus. And if you don't know that you have the virus, well, then undertake one of the rapid tests, which is another game changer. These rapid tests where you can check if you're highly infectious today. So the test and trace rollout has been really, really important for us. And I'm not just talking about national test and trace. I'm talking about the local teams for contact tracing locally in the towns, in the villages, in the cities, in the neighborhoods, making sure that we are keeping each other safe. We have been managing outbreaks, and so in our care homes, they were the ones who were most affected before we had testing in place. But now with the vaccination program, I'm pleased to say that those outbreaks are now starting to die down a bit, and that is really, really encouraging, because we had to make sure that we protected our most vulnerable care home residents, but also staff who work in care. And vulnerability isn't just within a setting. People are vulnerable in their own homes as well. So the shielding program as well, making sure that care workers, domiciliary care workers, people who sort of visit people and look after them in their own homes, have been vaccinated, and also informal carers as well have been vaccinated. So the important thing really to note now is that we are heading tentatively into a time where the people who are most vulnerable have started to be protected, but not all of them have been protected. And the people who can transmit the virus, can kickstart a new wave, haven't been vaccinated. And so we may trigger another wave. And that's why we still have to be cautious, and we still have to really look out for our infection control. Stay home if you're unwell, make sure you're tested, and take up the vaccine if you are offered. So as we go forward, therefore, we are in Ramadan. Just a few public health tips. We've seen people most affected by the virus are people who've continued to smoke or have high blood pressure. So if you don't know if you've got high blood pressure, have it checked out. Access support to stop smoking. I mean, Ramadan is a good time for making these New Year resolutions. And so hopefully we'll be able to celebrate Eid in a different way than we had last year. So even though we will still be maintaining all of the infection precautions, we know now what Eid is going to look like, and we can start to plan for that cautiously as well. I want to thank everyone, in the faith sector for keeping our places of worship safe, and for keeping all the volunteers, really, really rooted in our values and what keeps us going. These are the hardest times anyone has ever had to pass through. and we've all had to pass through the same challenges. Some of us, however, have been far more affected and much more hard hit than the others. And we're going to be talking about these inequalities, these health inequalities, the fact that all our lives matter. We'll be talking about this, and we'll be having to do something different in the coming few years. So I'll leave it here, and thank you so much for hosting me, and thank you so much for having this wonderful event. Thank you.
So much, Dr. Muna, and thank you for everything that you've been doing in understanding of what's happening on the ground. And absolutely, we all need to be taking the vaccine. I haven't been called yet, but I am eagerly waiting every day, checking my phone for that all-important text for when I can go for my vaccine. So we've come to the end of our speeches now. So I wanted to say thank you so much to all of our speakers. Your varied thoughts and heartfelt and moving speeches have really touched all of us. So thank you so much, and thank you for giving up your time as well to be with us today. We're now are going to open it up to questions. We've had some questions on the Q&A box coming in, and we've also had some really supportive and kind words on the chat box as well. So if you get a moment, have a read through those. Some of them are really, really sort of thanking you and, you know, really heartfelt responses to your speeches. So without further ado, if I could ask Waziha to kick us off with the first question that's come through.
So the first question is for Dr. Rahim, and it says about your experiences in the first wave as opposed to the second wave. Was it easier to help patients in the second wave due to what had been learned in the first wave?
I have to be honest and say I didn't work the second wave in ITU, mainly because of my PTSD from the first wave, and I had to protect my own mental health, and I you know, but I know from colleagues that still work in ITU that the second wave was much worse. And you know, as Captain Herron has said, beds were created in places that weren't designed for beds. Our hospitals, our services were incredibly overwhelmed, and as you saw in the news, people died in their thousands in our second peak, and you know, we know again, as in what we experienced in the first, that certain minorities, that certain communities were worse affected, but this time around we also saw a lot more younger patients, and I know that from the second wave, many of our frontline staff, like me from the first, are now accessing services for mental health because of the trauma that everyone has collectively experienced. And I don't think that's going to go away anytime soon. I think we all need to invest in it because of the potential for us to be here, you know, for a third wave. And that's why, you know, these important public health messages need to be shared. We all need to play our part in responsible guidance following.
Thank you very much for that. I can pose the same question to Captain Herron as well.
Yes, so I agree completely. The second wave was much worse. The first wave was, in general, more elderly people that were dying. The second wave was a lot younger. We were seeing families coming in and entire families dying from this horrible disease. The mental health toll on staff, it was huge. I've personally done research in this area, and in care homes in particular, over 50%, nearly 60% of the staff have some form of mental health disorder as a result. You know, this is a widespread thing, and burnout in medical staff is huge. There's been many published studies stating that up to 1 in 6 and sometimes more are going to leave the medical profession as a result of this pandemic. So I think the second wave certainly was worse from those perspectives, but also there was the good thing was that we did have a better understanding of the physiology of the disease. But when we were creating ITU beds that in places that shouldn't have been created, and we had non-ITU staff manning those beds, that then meant that people weren't getting the same specialist care that they should have got pre-pandemic times. So in that respect, I think it was much worse, and I think the death toll reflects that, in particular with the younger people. And I think that the next big thing will be the mental health pandemic that comes after that.
Thank you for that. Obviously, really sad to hear that, and thank you for your honest answers. I think Akila has the next question.
Yes, thank you. So there's a question for Sofia, I think that came in earlier on. Resham says that he is very impressed by your work, Sofia, but he was wondering if you have come across Sikh women prisoners and if they're facing any issues in prison.
Yes, so I think I did try and answer that in the group. So yes, there are Sikh women in prison. Muslim women make up about 6% of the female prison estate. And with Sikh women, it's a lot less. Sikh and Hindu women are a lot less. I won't say statistically how much, but I have actually dealt with cases of Sikh women in custody, whether it comes to, there's a very real issue around South Asian women and issues of honour, social stigma when an offence is committed, and a lot of my work, as Akila knows, is campaigning around that and helping women to resettle back into family life and into community life. And there are a number of Sikh women that I've supported back into communities, family support, generally rehabilitating and helping them set back up as well. We do have Sikh chaplains in prisons, as we have chaplains of all faiths in prison, so we have a chaplaincy service in there. There isn't a specialist Sikh resettlement project that's been set up yet. I can only imagine that's due to the smallness of numbers. Unfortunately, we do have a rather large Muslim prison population, and the Muslim Women in Prison project was one of the reasons that I'd campaigned to do resettlement work to raise awareness of the issue. But because of the multiple issues affecting Muslim women who are incarcerated in regards to their gender, their culture, their race, their faith, and unfortunately, the research that I've conducted, I'm on a fourth piece of research at the moment, showed that a lot of the drivers for Muslim women going to custody was, as is for Sikh and Hindu women, unfortunately difficult backgrounds. So by difficult backgrounds, we'd say undisclosed acts of violence, domestic violence, sexual violence, coercion, or a larger family crime. So yeah, in answer to your question, there are Sikh women, there are chaplains in every prison as well. If there isn't a Sikh chaplain, there will be one bought from outside in. But I'm happy to pick up that conversation with anybody that has any interest, because we do have Sikh and Muslim prisoners with lived experience who are happy to speak with people as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sofia. There's another question on the chat box, which I think I'll put to Mark Eastwood MP, if I may. So the question is from Ibrahim, and he's mentioned that today is Stephen Lawrence Day, nearly 30 years since the young man was brutally murdered. And he says that evidence shows that hate crimes against Muslims are high, and there is a rising populist extreme right wing targeting Muslims of the Islamic faith. And he's basically asking, what can government and public agencies do to take positive action and to proactively promote, positive initiatives to address, rising anti-Muslim hatred?
Thank you for that question, Akila. Yeah, I mean, it's obviously we've seen during the pandemic some very unfortunate images that have been shared on particularly on social media. When we first entered the lockdown, the first lockdown of these pictures of mosques and people allegedly queuing outside, and these were very historical pictures, and it is something that is very much does need tackling. But what I would say to you on that one is, yes, the government and public leaders and public agencies have a responsibility to put out messages and educate people, if you like, in terms of what is unacceptable, what unacceptable language and what is unacceptable behaviour towards any race or religion. What I think from my point of view, and what I'm trying to work on as a member of parliament and as a leader in the community is also we need to engage communities as well, and to try and promote understanding. And one of the things, for example, that's going on in my constituency, we have and I mentioned a place called Saviltown earlier, where there's a very large Muslim community. And it's at the bottom of the valley. At the top of the valley, there's a place called Frontline. It's very much a white community. And what we're actually setting up there is a youth group. And we're going to set a youth group that sort of in between the two communities. And I think the way that we can tackle this as well is not just by messaging, but it's by getting young people together in the same space almost, so we can dispel all the myths that are going on there. And it is going to be a difficult task going forward. And I know when I mentioned about the Rising to the Challenge report that we did with the APPG Muslims, there was quite a big section on Islamophobia that was included in that report. And I think it is really about engaging communities. We have the Visit My Mosque Day. You know, I think I mentioned that to you before, Akila, in my areas, and they're very good events. However, what I find is that the people that go there, it's almost like, to use, without using religious term, you're preaching to the converted, and it's the same people who go to the same events, and it's really, how do we get that message out? How do we tackle anti-Muslim hatred in our communities? And it is about the government. It is, yeah, absolutely about public agencies, but it's about everybody coming together as communities and trying to set up initiatives, whether that's community leaders, government, local councils, whichever, to be able to address this issue effectively.
Thank you so much, Mark. And you're absolutely right. We can all do our own bit, and we all do need to come together to work with each other and with other communities, and not just communities of faith, but no faith as well. So somebody from CST has just put a statement, so I'd just like to share that, please. Not a question, but a statement that I'd love you to read out. The Jewish community has decades of experience making its places of worship safe from hate crime, and now shares this knowledge for free with mosques and places of worship of all faiths. And if you'd like more information, you can Google Safe CST for more information. So thank you so much to CST, and thank you for all the incredible work that you do. I now have a question for Major General Duncan Capps. General, if I may, I wanted to ask you about the Army's efforts to promote a broader history of all of those who have contributed to the war efforts. It's been in the news today about how we haven't done enough really to kind of recognise the efforts of, you know, the soldiers in the past who died, you know, from the Commonwealth, who died in the world wars. So if you could tell us, you know, about your work around that, and also just, you know, how you're trying to connect, you know, the past with the present.
Yeah, thanks, Akila. And I didn't, I wasn't aware of the news article until this morning, and I think it's good that the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, you know, made a very public apology for what clearly isn't, you know, a proper representation of all of those people who have made the ultimate sacrifice to defend the freedom and the liberties and the right to practice our faith and live with democracy that we enjoy today. But interestingly, particularly when I was in my previous job, when I had a responsibility for community engagement, but now as well as Commandant at Sandhurst, we'd done a lot with AFMA and with the wider engagement team there to try and recognise that the contribution across all of communities to the freedoms we have now, and particularly coming out to the end of the 100th anniversary of the end of the First World War, we did a lot to really try and to bring those sacrifices. And you'll have seen all the work with Slim's 14th Army that was brought about the fact that, you know, 70% of the soldiers that fought for Bill Slim were not of a white, you know, British origin. And they were from the countries of the Commonwealth, who in many cases not just gave away their soldiers, but their whole industrial production during the Second World War was, you know, to the freedom and the support of that. We also did a big event at the National Arboretum a couple of years back, where it was it was the story really, and we talked about racism in the army and the journey that we've been on, really, certainly during the 36 years or so that I've served. But we then did some celebration of those people who won Victoria Crosses who didn't come from a white ethnic background. And it's interesting because if we, the army and the other armed forces, don't champion those things, who is going to do that? And certainly some of the communities were there, certainly the Caribbean community that were there, they feel that nobody is really celebrating these things and commemorating them, and that certainly went well. But I think there's more work to do, and it was one of the reasons that I wanted to join you, to put a senior military representation into the anti-Muslim hatred working group, because those people who would seek to portray these false narratives try in many cases to link the military with that. And we've seen people who've tried to join the services who have in most cases ultra right-wing ideologies, who we root out and we kick out. But if we can stand there alongside faith communities and say that these people and their vile vitriol are no part of a modern military organization that stands for respect for others as its most important value and standard, then I think it's a really important way to counteract some of those things that Mark was talking about earlier, about how we get into some of those communities and make it clear that this isn't the way that anyone wants to behave. So very long answer to the question, but I think we've got a good story, and I think that was a good thing that was done today in recognizing that, and that what we should do is continue to make a really big public fuss of all of those people who made the ultimate sacrifice. Over.
Thank you so much, General, and thank you so much for taking the time out from your leave to be with us today. And the work that you're doing is so important, and I look forward to continuing that work and working with you. I think Waziha is going to ask our final question for the evening, because it's sort of 10 minutes till iftar time. So I know people are sort of counting down. I know my tummy is anyway, it's rumbling away.
Okay, so our final question is, what has been the biggest barrier in the vaccine uptake? So that's for Captain Herron, Dr. Muna or Dr. Rahim.
I think for me, the biggest barrier for some people was the hesitancy, wanting to wait until other people have been vaccinated. And right now, millions of people have been vaccinated. So I can't understand that hesitancy still. And it's not related to actually not agreeing with vaccines. So we could say 10% of people maybe may not agree with vaccines. But where are the others? We've got a missing 20% that we really need to get the jab to. And so we are still urging, if you've been invited but you haven't yet taken it up, don't wait to be re-invited. Just come forward and take the jab, because it will protect you as soon as possible, and it will protect your loved ones as well going forward into the future.
Sorry.
Go on ahead.
Just to add to that, I think, unfortunately, there is a lot of criticism within the Muslim and minority communities as to the way the response to COVID has been handled. I think, as Captain Herron said earlier, there is a lot of mistrust, a lot of misinformation out there. And I know a lot of communities felt that, given the disparity in which the way some communities were impacted by the pandemic and in the ways they were dying, and then when they're not prioritized for vaccinations, and we know there are lots of reasons for that, which I feel which many feel weren't addressed by the government. I think it's a new vaccine, especially the Pfizer, the new technology, and I know our work with BEMA has highlighted that many people wanted to wait and see if there were any adverse reactions, and that they don't understand that the vaccine isn't going to cure you. It doesn't stop the spread of COVID. The outcomes are slightly different to what other vaccines do, and I think the information out there is still quite scary for some people, and we are working as a community to try and tackle that.
Absolutely, I agree with all the points. Some of the additional things that I personally have seen is people had misinformation about how the vaccine was tested, and a lot of people had heard that embryos and things like that were used and were actually in the vaccine, and people didn't want to have anything to do with things like that, which I can tell is misinformation. The next thing was the political foreplay that went on with the AstraZeneca vaccine. Obviously, it's known that in a very, very, very rare side effect is a blood clot, but that is such a small risk. It's much less than 0.0001%. You know, it's almost akin to what the normal population would get for blood clot. So this risk is so tiny, and taking the contraceptive pill or anything like that is a much higher risk. Even going on a long haul airline flight is a higher risk than actually getting the vaccine. So it's some things like that. Also, there was weird conspiracy theories involving Bill Gates that had come out, and so it was dispelling those types of things was the main sorts of things that I've came across.
Thank you so much for answering that question, and we're now going to close the evening, and I'm just going to give a few closing remarks, and then after that we will play the adhan, and then we will end. So just to say, I want to say a huge thank you for such an incredible and inspiring evening. It's been so moving to hear the speeches. Dr. Kiran Rahim, your speech had me in tears. And it's been so incredibly powerful, I think, to hear from our frontline workers, to remember the incredible sacrifices that all of you have made. And I think somebody in the chat said, you know, not only them, but their families as well, and everybody around them. We've all been through so many difficult challenges over the last year. And so it's been wonderful to be able to come together today and to celebrate the sacrifices, but also to really kind of appreciate, you know, this sort of coming together. And it's, you know, it was wonderful to hear, I think, from Imam Asim as well, who basically spoke about this coming together in such a sort of deep and profound way. And our Cheif Rabbi, who, you know, gave wonderful, powerful words about communication, you know, being key for our communities to come together. And that's what this evening has been about. It's been about all of us from different walks of life, different backgrounds, coming together, recognizing the positive, recognizing the wonderful sacrifices. I'm calling it wonderful, but it's been wonderful for us, you know, that people have put themselves on the front line in that way. And I just want to say a final thank you to all of our panelists, but also especially to the Armed Forces Muslim Forum, without whom we couldn't have done tonight's event. It's been incredible working with all of you. It's been a privilege and an honor. So thank you to all of you, and thank you to all of you who attended and asked such wonderful questions and joined in this evening's celebration. So I'm now going to end there. I would like to say Ramadan Mubarak. I'd like to say a early Eid Mubarak as well. I really hope, inshallah, the rest of Ramadan goes well. And thank you once again. And I'll now hand over to Waziha, who will introduce Captain, not Captain, I think it's Abdoulie, who's going to recite the adhan. I'm so sorry, I'm getting all my military titles mixed up.
You. That's okay. So yeah, Corporal Abdoulie Jobe is going to do the adhan for us now. Thank you very much.
Bismillah. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمد رسول الله أشهد أن محمد رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله سيدنا محمد رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. اللهم رب هذه الدعوة التامة والصلاة القائمة آت محمد الوسيلة والفضيلة وبعثه مقام محمودا الذي وعده حل له شفاعته يوم القيامة. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.
Thank you, Abdullah. Jazakallah.